It's time for another edition of the Blue White Illustrated Penn State Football and Recruiting Podcast. He's Ryan Snyder. I'm Greg Pickel from BWI, and we have so much Penn State news to talk about. The Rivals 250 is out. Many class of 2023 Penn State targets and players with Penn State offers are in the Rivals 250, so we're going to break that down. We're going to step back and talk one more time about Media Day, which was last Saturday. Of course, the Nittany Lions are continuing fall camp, and the USA Today coaches poll is out too. So let's get right to it. We know that you want us to cover as much ground as we can, so we're going to try and check as many boxes as possible over the next half hour, maybe a little bit longer or so. We'll see. But Penn State number 20 in the coaches poll that just came out. Not a huge surprise. I think most people thought, Ryan, this would be a top 20 team before the season. And by the end of September, if things go the way Penn State fans want it to, this will probably be a top 10 team if it beats Wisconsin, if it beats Auburn, obviously takes care of Ball State and Villanova. So time will tell, but one speed bump has already presented itself. Adisa Isaac, the expected starting defensive end for Penn State, is not going to be available to start the year. Doesn't sound like he'll probably be available at all. I think it was more of a hope and a prayer than anything else that James Franklin was kind of insinuating when he talked about you never know about the advances in medical stuff and things like that. So Penn State, they knew about this for a little bit. Obviously, it was finally confirmed over the weekend. But, Ryan, it's a big loss. They have a lot of guys at that position, but it's a lot of unproven depth opposite Arnold Ebiketie, who, of course, is produced at the Group of 5 level, but will be asked to do it at the Power 5 level for the first time this year.
Yeah. This isn't meant as like a slight on Adisa, but like he was also a little unproven too. And,
sure.
He was expected starter and all that, but, there was still – what his potential is, what his ceiling is, what his floor is, was still kind of unknown too. So it's a loss. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to overthink it or downplay it, but there's still guys there that can produce. I mean, to me, Nick Tarburton is the crucial piece here, just because we don't know enough. What we know is James Franklin loves him. He's been talking about him for 2 years now, so they've clearly seen a good bit in practice. There's a reason that Tarburton has come up now for, like I said, two straight off seasons is someone they want to see. Ebiketie, I feel good about him. When he signed or when he announced his transfer, I went back and watched a game or two, or skimmed a game or two. I didn't watch it completely, but he's a polished player, so I feel good about him. I think he should be the one that breaks out and has the best season from that group. Like I said, Tarburton is kind of the wild card. Smith-Vilbert, someone who Penn State has talked about for a long time now, is he's physically a freak. We've seen him now for a year and a half, and if he's able to produce, I think he can hold his own. And then Laceda, I don't know what to expect from Jesse rushing off the edge. Yeah, I know he's a solid player. And his strengths were, filling those gaps and taking on blockers. So that's a positive. But what he'll bring at defensive end is still kind of up in the air. So it's a loss. Don't get me wrong, but it's not, to me, it's not like if they would have lost away or somebody like that in recent years. So it's he's a good player, but there's talent there that can fill the gaps.
Yeah, we were talking about this exact conversation over at the Lions Den Premium Forum at bwi.rivals.com on Tuesday morning. Just this idea that, just like you're saying, it's not like you're losing an Alway. It's not like you're losing a Etor Gross-Matos or a Shaka Toney. At the same time, those guys aren't around anymore, and Adisa Isaac was supposed to be the one to step into that spotlight like those guys did. I mean, I know that each of them had a little bit of a different career trajectory, but for the most part, those guys reached a point where everyone said going into a preseason that maybe they haven't done it yet, but this is the year they do it. And I think that's what the most disappointing part of it is, but we'll see. Let's move on to the recruiting side of things. Obviously, again, Penn State Media Day was hosted last Saturday. You had a chance to talk with Terry Smith and Taylor Stubblefield, the defense and offensive recruiting coordinators, respectively, on this staff. And let's start with this, Ryan, because I think people think, maybe get a little bit confused when they hear those titles, because you have Andy Frank and Kenny Sanders and those Alan Zamitis and everybody in the recruiting office, and then you have two staff members who are quote-unquote recruiting coordinators. Why don't we start there? What exactly does that entail for those two guys based on the rest of the staff, and then what did you learn from them?
Just different pieces of organization. I mean, for Andy Frank's kind of more the numbers guy. Destiny Rodriguez does kind of more of the organizing from a visit perspective. And then for the coaching staff, it's more so, I think, organizing, which players the staff likes more than anything, more of a scouting perspective from what I understand. But, I'd actually, and that's one thing I wish I could have got into a little bit more, is what their specific roles are. From what I understand, it's more so of a scouting side than anything else. But just from talking to those guys, obviously they're very excited about the class. They're really happy with everything that rolled through in July. I think from talking to Terry a little bit, he admitted that they expected good things, but maybe not quite the run that they went on. One cool quote I got out of Terry was, he basically admitted that, guys were sleeping in Lash. The quote was, you basically sleep in Lash. Our recruiting staff, I believe Andy Frank and those guys basically slept there overnight. We're talking 6 a.m. to 10, 11 o'clock at night. It was incredibly busy, but we're doing what we had to do to make sure the program continues to grow and get better. Even that 10, 11 o'clock at night, I think that was an understatement, I think, for some of the recruiting staff. I know. So just a quick little story. I was speaking with a source one night in June, and long story short, I reached out probably 9 o'clock or so. I got a call back at around 11:15, 11:30. And of course, I'm settling down for the night, take the call, reach out. Hey, are you finally, getting home? How's the day? Finally getting a chance to relax. And that person told me that they were just actually going to dinner at the time, and they were still going back to Lash. And then I learned the next day that they were actually there until 3 a.m. So the recruiting staff, they genuinely did put in some kind of hours that were, they work late hours a lot, but 2, 3 a.m. literally sleeping there, getting back up at 6, so they didn't drive home. That happened. Definitely the first 2 weeks or so when it was hectic and guys were on campus every day. So, but as far as other takeaways from their talks, camp. The importance of getting guys on campus is just so huge from a visit perspective, but also getting the numbers. This staff is pretty heavily based analytically. Now, a lot of, that's grown throughout college football, but I would put the staff up there in the top 20% or so. They're huge on numbers. I think from what I've gathered, the rough estimate was 1,400 to 1,500 campers. And of course, a lot of those players are never going to get to this kind of a level, but just from talking to sources and whatnot, I think it was somewhere around 300 to 400 or so are guys who at minimum could maybe walk on at a school at Penn State. So to get accurate numbers on that many amount of players, especially when you got nothing last year, is pivotal. And I think that'll play a role into next year's class and even 2024 and beyond. So that was big. And then just getting guys on campus as far as a visit perspective, this is something we've hit on a lot, but this is a strength for James Franklin. It's a strength for really his entire staff. James spends nearly the entire visit with some of these guys. And if there's multiple guys, he's bouncing back and forth, of course. But, for those elite players, he spends nearly, I would say, probably 70% of these visits with them. And that's not something you see everywhere else. That's where Franklin really shines. So those are some of the big takeaways. One last thing, actually, too, is Taylor Stubblefield. I was talking to him about the individual workouts that they were able to do this year. And for those unaware of it, for this year only, if a 2022 player came for an unofficial visit, they were allowed to do, I think it was about an hour's workout, maybe a little less, with select members of the staff. And obviously, normal years, you're only allowed to do that during camp. So to get, I think it was somewhere around 40 to 60 players is what the number was kind of given to me. To have that amount of 2022 guys work out for you individually, that's something I think this staff and many other staffs around the country would like to maybe see moving forward. Taylor flat out admitted that that's something he would like to see. So I would be curious in the months ahead to see if the AFCA, the American Football Coaches Association, if they kind of lobby that to the NCAA, because it seems to be a trend just from talking to colleagues elsewhere too, that this is something coaches would like to see continued. Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I think that the biggest disappointment with all the stuff tied to the pandemic in terms of things that got changed and opportunities that were missed and things like that, the biggest disappointment will be if some of these things that had to come about because of how much time was missed, like these evaluations, if those aren't taken into the future
simply because we're not, shut down or can't, in a dead period, whatever. So hopefully that is the case. I think that there's some other things that have had to happen during the dead period from a recruiting perspective and things like that have been good, I think, not bad. So we'll see if that happens in the future. But no, a lot of good insight there. You can read Ryan's story, more from those two guys over at bwi.rivals.com. We have a lot of stuff up today. It is busy, man. It is 100% August, I guess is the best way to put it. I mean, we have photos. You can see the homepage there. Photos, an Olympic update. Obviously, Dave Eckert's looking at his 3 key questions for different positions. Nate Bauer has a bunch of stuff up day in and day out. You have T. Frank breaking down the film and more. So check us out, bwi.rivals.com, where you're also going to be able to find the Rivals 250, Ryan. So the Rivals 250 came out shortly before we started recording. So about noon on Tuesday. I believe, according to your math, Penn State has offered about half of the players in the Rivals 250. Alex Birchmeier, obviously the lone class of 2023 commit for Penn State right now, is, of course, among the group. You have Chase Pasantis, Dante Moore, James Hurd, Jordan Hall, Lamont Payne, Josiah Trotter, Matthias Barnwell, who was, of course, committed to Penn State at one time, Ramirez Stewart, who just put Penn State in his top 12, Rodney Gallagher, who is a really good player from the state of Pennsylvania. The list goes on and on. Tamir Robinson, you don't want to forget him. So I know there's a lot of guys you want to get here too. So where do you want to start? I mean, I guess let's open the bidding with Penn State's lone commitment in the class of 2023 at this point in time.
Yeah. Well, let's clarify one thing. It's the class of 2023 Rivals 250. I think you kind of hit on it there, but I want to clarify that. The 2022, of course, has been out for a while. And Rivals they did the Rivals 100 in the spring, and then they assigned 4-star ratings to a lot of these guys, but this is the first time they put everybody in order. So the big takeaway really from me looking at all this is that the Mid-Atlantic is down a bit this year as far as numbers. Now, Pennsylvania is the deepest of those states. There's currently 8 players in the Rivals 250, and when I look over the scene, I can see maybe a couple others jumping in. We'll see what happens there. But Maryland is really down. They have just 2 players in the Rivals 250 this year. For some perspective, they've averaged about 9 over the past decade. So that'll be something that I think we watch closely. I mean, you kind of see that in Penn State scholarship numbers too. I believe they've only offered about 6 players in Maryland, and usually that number's kind of close to double by now for the upcoming class. So as at the moment, Jason Moore, defensive tackle from DeMatha, is number 33, and Mason Robinson, defensive end from McDonough, is number 218. And those are the only players in the 250. I could see maybe someone like a Dylan Gooden moving up. He's a defensive end from Good Counsel. And then Antonio Tripp, of course, we've talked about him a good bit, offensive lineman for McDonough. Those are guys maybe I could see moving up at some point. But even if they do, this is still going to be one of the lowest totals we've ever seen in Maryland. I think their normal low, I think previous low was 4, maybe 5. And I think that 4 was also back in like 2003 when all this stuff was just kind of getting started. So, but if you go down through the list, man, New Jersey has just 4 players in the 250. Virginia has, I believe, 4 players in the 250. Virginia's averaged about 11 over the last decade. New Jersey's offered somewhere around 8, 9. I think they're 9 too. Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland have all been pretty similar as far as 8, 9, 10 or so is their average. So when you look at all of these, Pennsylvania is the one who's closest to its average, which I said is 9. But New Jersey, just 4 players. Virginia, just 4 players. Of course, you hit on Birchmeier. Birchmeier's number 56 overall. He actually moved up about 5 spots. I think he's number 7 for offensive lineman, and I believe number 2 or 3 for offensive guard. So that's good. Other guys are Virginia, Matthias Barnwell, you mentioned. He's at number 120. Joel Starlings for Virginia is a number 190. And then a player who Penn State hasn't really offered yet, Antonio Kottman out of Life Christian Academy. He's number 231. I love these that Barnwell highlight there. It's a heck of a catch in the back of the end zone. So, this just overall down a little bit for the class, but there's still plenty of talent. I think they've offered around 30 or so, they've offered 113 players in the Rivals 250. And when I look at it, I see 30 or so guys who I consider seriously considering Penn State. About 24 or so of them have visited this summer, which is a good start. I think that's pretty much what we see normally in other years. About 2 dozen to 3 dozen players from the upcoming class coming onto campus in the summer. So that's about average. But overall, Mid-Atlantic is definitely down a bit, and Penn State's going to have to get those guys, obviously, in the region, but then they're also going to have to search outside the region to find some talent.
Yeah, so I'm going to throw the Chase Basantis highlight tape up next. If you're watching on YouTube, Ryan cut some clips of these guys' huddle so you can get a feel for who they are while we talk about him. Basantis, one of the – am I pronouncing that right? Is that correct?
Yeah, Chase Basantis, okay. Yep.
Yep, so one of the New Jersey guys, 4-star offensive lineman, really good player, Ryan, who Penn State certainly has a lot of interest in. But I guess, the main takeaway here is that we know James Franklin always wants to do well in Pennsylvania. He wants to do well in the 300-mile radius around Penn State, which includes New Jersey, of course. But they have shown in the past an ability to recruit outside of that area and do it well, whether it's Texas, whether it's Florida, whether it's some other states that are not in that range that we're talking about. And they're going to have to in this next class. There's just no choice. I mean, you could fill your class up. If you landed every single one of these guys, I guess you could fill your class up to some extent, but it's not going to happen. You're going to miss some of them. Some of them are going to want to go south. Some of them are going to want to stay maybe at an in-state school, depending on where they're at. So you're not going to get all of them. This will have to be a bit of a national class, I think. You'll have your PA guys, you'll have your region guys, but my early read on it is that for the most part, you are going to need to be able to recruit nationally and do so at a really high level.
Yeah. Well, Chase there, one thing I was going to mention with Chase is he plays tackle primarily for his high school, but I expect him to be a guard. And, of course, with Birchmeyer already committed, Antonio Tripp feels like more of a guard to me. It's a good interior group. But they'll have to find some guys who can play tackle. Luke Montgomery, who's someone I hit on in the BWI Daily last week with Thomas Frank Carr. He's a good tackle prospect that I expect Penn State to push for. He may be their top overall tackle prospect. We'll see. But as you said, man, yeah, they'll have to definitely recruit nationally. But it is good, though, that Pennsylvania has a solid base of talent, eight players overall right now. I'll roll through them. I didn't get to go through the Pennsylvania rankings, so let me roll through that quick. We'll start with Tamir Robinson out of Brashear, number 59 overall. He's the top-ranked player in the state. He primarily plays safety in a lot of these clips, but he'll be a linebacker at the next level. And I've hit on him kind of previously. I do think he's someone that Penn State sits in a pretty good position with, but we'll see what happens in the weeks moving forward. Rodney Gallagher, number 99 overall, wide receiver from Laurel Highlands. Then those are the only two inside the Rivals 100. After that, we moved to two linebackers, Samaj Bridgman from Archbishop Wood, linebacker Josiah Trotter from St. Joseph's Prep. Those are 111 and 112. Ramirez Stewart is a player who I like a lot at safety, number 124. This is Josiah Trotter's highlights, by the way. Trotter's a heck of a player. He's one of the more polished linebacker prospects, I think, in the region. At least I think he is compared to Bridgman. Tamir Robinson's pretty polished too, but if I had to pick any of them as far as advanced at this stage, I would go with Trotter. But anyway, Ramirez Stewart at safety, number 124 out of Ematep Charter. And then we have three guys down towards the bottom a little bit. James Hurd Jr. He's originally from Voorhees, New Jersey, which is right outside Philly, and he elected to transfer to St. Joseph's Prep this year. So he would have been a New Jersey guy. He gets counted towards Pennsylvania, of course, since he's at St. Joseph's Prep now. Number 185 is Marquise Williams, running back from Bishop McDevitt. I need to learn more about Marquise. He's been very quiet, didn't visit Penn State this year. I believe he took maybe one visit, maybe two. I think maybe one was to West Virginia. I got to double check on that. But he just wasn't very active this summer. It's just a quiet player. So just another guy I need to learn more about. I got to kind of get a better feel for how hard Penn State's pushing him too. And then number 229 is cornerback Lamont Payne from Chartiers Valley. I've hit on Lamont a lot. I think he's one of those guys who could potentially make a commitment to Penn State before the end of the year. And he's a player that I know Penn State loves. One thing I was able to clarify over the last week was some 40 numbers for Payne. He came and ran around a 4.6 at Penn State. This was their whiteout camp, so the very beginning of June. And he's been working on that throughout the summer to improve. And one good thing that I learned then is a few weeks later at Pitt, he ran a 4.51. So he is making strides with his 40 time. And don't get me wrong, I mean 4.6 is fine for a player his age. 2 years to go still. He would be improving. So see a 4.51 now, give him some time to keep moving up and improving. And with 2 years to go, he should be just fine from a speed perspective. But he's an aggressive corner. I like Lamont a lot. I've talked about him a ton just off the field, on the field, he'd be a great fit for this program.
Yeah, there's no doubt. We're watching his highlights right now. We'll roll Rodney Gallagher's in here in a second. But, yeah, I guess the thing that jumps out to me, Ryan, you just run down the list of names there of Pennsylvania guys in this Rivals Top 250 for the class of 2023. And you have a lot of guys, as we put up Gallagher's highlights here, you have a lot of guys who have visited campus and came to campus in June or July for the Lash Bash. So you have guys who have not just shown interest on social media or through talking to the coaches or whatever, but actually kind of put their chips on the table and also came to campus when they could have went a number of other places this summer in a very limited visit window. So I think that's really important to note as well, that to get these guys, you have to get them on campus when you can, and Penn State's been able to do that in a lot of cases with the group of players we're talking about here who are currently seen among the best in the next recruiting cycle.
Yeah. Ramirez Stewart and Marquise Williams, I believe, are the only two who didn't visit this summer. Stewart's a heck of a player. I'm curious to kind of get a feel for his interest in Penn State. Like, my initial impressions kind of give me the vibe that he's someone who may be a little more interested in going south, kind of like Eni White, a couple other guys we've seen. And that's going to happen every year in Philadelphia. Elijah Robinson from Texas A&M, he obviously has great ties to all those schools, so he's going to pluck some guys. I could see Texas. I think Texas A&M was one of the few schools he's actually visited. So that just early impressions, give me that suggestion. But I'm sure he'll end up here at some point, and they were already in his top 12, which he actually just announced the other day. Let's get that list down to a top 5 or so, and then we'll get a better feel for who's seriously standing out. But like I said, Marquise Williams, he's another guy I need to learn about. But Robinson, Gallagher, Bridgman, Trotter, James Hurd Jr., and then Lamont Payne. Out of those 6, I think Penn State can realistically land at least 4 of them. And if they could get 5 or 6, that would be an awesome pool this year. Right now, I think Tamir Robinson's realistic. I think Rodney Gallagher's realistic. I think Bridgman's realistic. Trotter, I kind of lean a little bit more towards maybe Clemson or Ohio State. But Penn State's definitely there. I think maybe they're 3rd at the moment. Hurd Jr. likes Penn State a lot. One thing with James is he's a little undersized as a defensive end, so I'll be curious to see if schools maybe play around with him as a linebacker. I don't know if he's quick enough, though, so just curious to see how hard some schools go after him. But he still has 2 years to grow, too, so that'll be important. And then Lamont Payne, I've hit on him many times now. I think he's someone that should end up here. So they could get Payne, they could get Gallagher, they could get Bridgman, and then definitely Tamir Robinson or maybe James Hurd. That would be a great pool. I think Penn State would be very happy with that.
So obviously the question everybody always asks, Ryan, is, well, and you kind of just hit on this a little bit, but who's going to commit? How good will the class be? How big can it be? Will there be a top 10, a top 5, a top 15, whatever? So let's put the crystal ball hat on for a second and shake up the magic 8 ball. And I'm not asking for specifics here, names, but when you look at just what Penn State's done in the class of 2022 so far, and is, you see the kind of impact that that's having on recruits, both in this cycle and the next one. But you also realize that they might go over a little bit this year in terms of numbers, and that could obviously shorten things up next year if they don't have guys hit the portal and leave early for the draft and blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, realistically, just what is your early take on this class of 2023 for Penn State? What should the outlook be? What should the expectation be?
The outlook, I mean, right now I would say 20 to 22, 23, but it's so hard until the transfer portal works itself out in the winter. That's when we'll really know. I mean, right now I think if you really want to throw a number out there, I would say 22 for the class of 2023 as far as number-wise. They sit in a good position with like a Mason Robinson down in McDonough. Chase Basantis, he's the top-ranked guy who I seriously believe is interested in Penn State. He's been showing serious interest in Penn State for a long time. He just has offers from everywhere too. So that needs to kind of shake out, stay with more visits. I realistically see. Do I think Penn State, from the talent I see, I don't know if Penn State can do a top 5 class out of this. I do believe a top 10 class is realistic, and that's kind of what they're on pace for this year. It's just going to require them really finishing. The limited talent in the Mid-Atlantic, they have to bat well there. They're going to have to hit probably 30-40% out of those 25, 30 guys or so. And then I think they can do that. If they can build about half their class with that, then eventually, more prospects from outside the region will start coming up for visits. And as that happens, and then we get into the spring, and then of course official visit season next June, that's when we'll get a better feel for which kind of national players will show interest here. But I see Penn State kind of having a similar class to what they've had in recent years. But again, we're projecting something that's whatever it is, 14, 15 months down the road. So much is going to have an impact on that in the months ahead.
Yeah, it's changed a lot. I mean, obviously the portal's a part of it, the visit calendar's a part of it, everything. But it's certainly not the way it used to be when it comes to projecting these things. It's a lot more fluid now. It can change at a moment's notice in good ways and bad. And ultimately, whether you have a full Mid-Atlantic and Pennsylvania to pick from or not, the expectation is to get the job done wherever the prospects are. Go find them, bring them to Penn State, and go from there. So we will see. You can see the Penn State football preseason magazine from Blue White Illustrated. It's on newsstands now. It's 116 pages of full color information to get you ready for both the opener at Wisconsin and beyond. Visit colemanpub.com/BWI-preview or call customer service 814-234-1177. That's for the preseason magazine. Also, you can find out how to order our September magazine, which is getting ready to go to the printer, getting ready to be available for Penn State fans. Those of you watching us on YouTube, you're going to get a sneak peek at the cover right there. So David Taylor, Sean Clifford, a lot of recruiting insight. Pretty much you want to know it about Penn State football, you're going to get it in that issue. Visit colemanpub.com/BWI-preview, or again, the phone number 814-234-1177. Ryan, let's close things out with this. We're recording on August 10. It's the first full week of a summer camp for Penn State. They started practices last Friday. Obviously, they worked out. We were there for a limited amount of time on Saturday, and they're back on the field now this week. The recruiting has pretty much ground to a halt. You're going to see some top lists come out like we saw with a couple of 2023 guys of lately, maybe an offer here, an offer there. But for the most part, the recruiting front has slowed down, and it's full steam ahead, focusing on this current team that is now down to, about 25 days, give or take, to take the field at a very hostile environment at Wisconsin. And I guess the one thought I had that I wanted to share and see what your reaction was, I can't remember over the last 8 years or 7 years, I guess it would be, of James Franklin preseason conversations where he has been so blunt and vocal about who they're facing in week one and how good that team is going to be, and rah, rah, rah. I mean, he's said it multiple times, and the players did too multiple times throughout the media day news conferences, that this is the challenge. Unlike, everyone knows that it's Wisconsin. It's not a team that you can run over by 30. And I know that Penn State's had some tough September matchups. This obviously is one heck of a challenging opener. But all told, Ryan, I just found it really interesting that they are not hiding from the fact that this is a major, major game to start the season with, unlike ones that they've really, it's been some time since they've had anything like this to start the year, and they're embracing it. And I think that came through on Saturday.
Yeah. Well, one thing, I think Nate's done a story on this in the past, so that I believe they've had to start their conference season on the road a lot. I wish I had the stat in front of me, but it's been quite a few over the past couple of years. And I think that's something that James has not liked over the last years. He would like to start at home for those big games. But look, after a 4-5 season, you have Auburn, and I don't even want to overlook Ball State too, man. With all those seniors they have coming back, we just don't know what to expect here, and that's unlike anything we've seen in recent years. My prediction has gone back and forth between 9-3 and 8-4, and a lot of it is because I have no idea what to expect in this Wisconsin game, just because I also don't really know what to expect from Wisconsin, who was up and down a lot last year. They were ravaged by COVID much more than Penn State was. So
correct.
That's kind of why I there's a part of me that leans Wisconsin here a little bit, just from what I saw last year. I think the linebackers are key for Penn State this year. That was a point where they really struggled. That makes Curtis Jacobs just so important in my eyes. I think if he can really hit the ground running, have a good season, it'll be just monstrous for that defense. So obviously Sean Clifford, he needs to rebound. I think fans know that. And then can Noah Cain, become the Noah Cain that we expect him to be. I mean, he is the next in that line of Barkley and and Sanders. He's a guy who absolutely should be a top 50 NFL pick if he can stay healthy and reach his potential. So, but it just, man, that first game is just such a toss-up this year. And I think that's what Franklin's really stressing that, because he knows that, a win in that game could mean so much to this program, but also a loss after what happened last year would just be really inflating. And, not just for the team, but for the fan base too, who, wants to put last year in the rearview mirror, wants to just think it was a down year because of COVID. But we're going to find out if it was about that or if it was about a lack of talent. And it's only going to take a couple weeks to figure that out.
Yeah, it's only going to take a few quarters at Wisconsin to get a feel for it, and then by the end of September, you're going to know, because I think Athlon Sports recently had the anonymous coach thing out where they talk to various people around the conference about each school and kind of get an honest assessment of where these people think these other schools stand, and they're not putting their name to it, so they, in theory, should be honest. But the one coach I believe that was quoted said something to the effect of, a lot of people think that was a COVID issue last year, and we're going to really find out in a hurry whether or not it actually was. And this is where you get into it. Again, with linebacker, you have Brandon Smith, you have Curtis Jacobs, but after, Ellis Brooks is back, but then what? I mean, what can those guys reach the next level, or is it more of the same that we saw last year? Defensive line now is in that same conversation. I mean, all the names that Penn State has to throw at the board at defensive ends in particular are fantastic, but are those guys ready for game day? Are they ready to take on a Wisconsin rushing attack that's going to try and grind you down for 4 quarters? That goes for the linebackers too. So, and then with safety, who steps up beside Jaquan Brisker, and can that secondary as a whole create turnovers? And is there a guy or two that can join Parker Washington and Jahan Dotson in that receiver rotation? And so, just a lot of questions to answer. We've talked about it at length, and obviously we're going to know soon where Penn State stands, but the time's coming. The clock's ticking, and it's going to be game week before we know it. Yeah,
one thing I keep hearing great things about Cam Sullivan-Brown. He was very good in last year's preseason, got hurt. He's another player, just like Nick Tarburton, who feels like they showed them a lot in practice and then just haven't been able to stay healthy to show fans in Beaver Stadium. So that'll be interesting. And then, honestly, one of the biggest things just kind of outside of football is just what's going to happen here with COVID.
Right.
Is it going to change things? Everybody's expecting to be in Beaver Stadium. Well, the media is already starting to get cut off from interaction with these teams, not just us, but, Michigan just recently kind of switched everything to Zoom. Our media day was supposed to be all, together and whatnot, and then started things, a few press conferences got pushed to Zoom. So the way things are trending here, I'm a little concerned about what might happen here in the weeks leading up to some of these games, because fans fully expect to be there, and I'm starting to get the impression from some of these athletic departments that they're having second thoughts about it. So we'll see. I don't want to negative about it, but it's something I'm thinking about a lot.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating, Ryan, because again, the issue just becomes it's a risk tolerance, basically, and where do these universities draw the line? And it may be different from where you draw it, or I draw it, or a fan draws it, or whatever, or James Franklin even, or a member of his staff. But once they make, it's going to be I hate to say it, and I hope I'm wrong, but it feels like it's going to be a week-to-week thing where, you might have X number of fans at a game one week, and then the next week it's reduced a little bit or something along those lines. So we'll see. Hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully everything is able to move forward as we're planning to. But either way, yes. And either way, you're going to be able to follow the Nittany Lions all season long. bwi.rivals.com for the latest Penn State football news from our team at Blue White Illustrated. Ryan, I think that's a wrap for this one, buddy. Anything else you want to add?
I am gone next week, although I think we'll still figure out a podcast. I want to do some picks here at some point, just looking forward to the season totals and whatnot. Those podcasts always get my interest, so maybe we will try to figure that out. One last thing, recruiting-wise, Aiden Schuler is supposed to make a commitment on Sunday. Feels like they're trending towards Notre Dame. At least a lot of my colleagues think it's Notre Dame. One thing I will say for Penn State is that he is still very active with Penn State. He just did a Zoom or two with them last week, including one with the academic staff. And usually when you get to that point, you're only doing that because you're seriously interested. So I'm not completely writing him off to Notre Dame just yet, but all my colleagues seem to think that that's going elsewhere, and I'm only getting really the Penn States out of it. So we'll see what happens. We've got a handful of days until we know there. And like I said, I will do some sort of podcast with you guys next week, but we'll figure it out when the time comes.
All right. Well, hit that bell and please subscribe. Or if you're listening to the podcast, give us a like, a listen, review. Let us know what you think, what you want us to talk about, what you want to know about the Nittany Lions, and we will be back next week. He's Ryan Snyder. I'm Greg Pickel, and you have been listening to the latest Blue White Illustrated Penn State football and recruiting podcast. We'll catch you next time.